sponsored by the Institute of Museum and Library Services.
Welcome to the National Book Festival. My name is Nina Desir, and today we're joined by Sharon Flake, Coretta Scott King medalist and best-selling author, most recently of The Life I'm In. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your latest book?
My name is Sharon Flake. I've been an author for about 23 years. I'm mainly known for my novel, The Skin I'm In, and the sequel to that book, or the follow-up, or the sister novel, is The Life I'm In. For so many years, young people and teachers and other people have asked me, whatever became of Charlize Jones? Charlize Jones was the bully in The Skin I'm In, which is a book about a dark-skinned girl who gets picked on because people don't like how she looks, how she dresses, the color of her skin. And Charlize is one of those bullies. She's the main bully. And people have wondered about her. They weren't so much in love with Charlize, but they wanted to know, was she okay? The life she lived at home, her parents had passed away, her sister had Charlize really functioning as a mini adult. So people wanted to know, how is she? So The Life I'm In is the answer to that book. And we find at the beginning, Char's getting on the bus. She's leaving to go live with her grandparents, something that gets mentioned in the first book. But what happens along the way is what happens to a lot or too many of our teens, especially runaways, but not only runaways, is that she gets trafficked along the way.
You mentioned the book, The Skin I'm In, which is your debut novel. And I was wondering, so the sister novels, The Skin I'm In and The Life I'm In, I noticed are 20 years apart. Was it challenging to return to those characters? What was it like to revisit your own work?
Well, you know what? For people that didn't know, that's The Skin I'm In. And this is The Life I'm In, the follow-up book. It was challenging, Mina. I didn't even want to revisit some of those characters. And I've told young people for years, I will never, ever, absolutely write a follow-up to The Skin I'm In. One reason is it's done so well. It's still my biggest selling book. It just came out in Italian. There are 1 million copies of The Skin I'm In around. It's sold on almost every continent. So it's hard to kind of replicate that. And but one day, really during the anniversary of the book, the 20th anniversary, someone asked me that question, are you ever going to write that sequel? And my answer was no. But if I ever did, it would be from Charlize Jones' perspective and would deal with human trafficking. I tried to leave out some of the characters from the first book, right? Still. And my editor is the one that kept saying, I think you have to pull them in. I think you have to pull them in. I was glad she did, because it became also a book about sisterhood, about women and girls supporting and lifting each other up, right?
So you mentioned human trafficking as a theme. And I noticed that you cover this issue, you cover loss, you cover abuse, and other very difficult topics. How, as an author, do you navigate the delicate balance between showing enough of a traumatic issue so as to capture its painful reality while not turning some of your audience away?
One way you do that, Nina, is to always remember that you're writing for young people, right? You're writing for teenagers. A lot of my books are used in schools. They're read with parents, right? And then, young people obviously read them on their own. So I wanted, and you can cover a topic in such a way also, like you said, that you can turn someone off. And I never want to lose my audience. So that's something I just kept front and center at the top of my mind. And I'm a mother as well. My daughter might be 32, but I'm a mother as well. And I always sort of remember the kind of books I wanted her to read as a middle schooler, as a high schooler, the kind of books that weren't there necessarily about Black people, not as many as we have today. And so I tried to keep that in mind. So when I do my research when I did my research, I really had written a lot of the book already. Right. And so when I went to talk to someone who had been trafficked, when I went to talk to police officers and go through material put out by the federal government, I had done a lot of writing. And then I went, so I knew who this person was and I knew how I wanted her to be. And then I stepped back and went through and sort of incorporated that world.
I think it's really interesting how you speak about like this world, because I really do feel like this novel opened an entirely new world to me. And what I was so amazed that by how just accessible you made this topic, without, making light of it. You still managed to make this this very difficult topic so accessible to me as a teenager. So I really, really enjoyed reading it. Speaking of opening new worlds, I'm just sort of curious, what book or author opened the world to you when you were a kid?
But it was Langston Hughes. And it was, when I look back, I was in middle school. It really was about one of his characters, Simple, which really is an adult novel. You're right. It's not that teens couldn't read it. Was nothing inappropriate in it. So I'm not even sure where I found it. For years, I told people, I found it in the school library, but I'm not quite so sure. And when I read Simple, which was an everyday average Black man who sort of stood in the bar of all places and gave his view of the world, right? Talking to his friend and some of the conversation I also heard at my house, right? About what it was like to be African-American in this world. The foods that people ate, pig feet, sweet potato pie, and also that voice, Black African-American English, vernacular, different people call it, other things, but that voice that I heard at home, the way I spoke at home, and a reminder to me that it was okay to be a little Black girl from North Philadelphia. That was my takeaway. I was getting that from home. I was getting it from my neighbors and even my teachers. But the larger world, given that I was from North Philadelphia, didn't necessarily see a lot of, I think, value in that community. And even though Langston Hughes was probably living in Harlem when he wrote the book, I understood that world, that voice, those people. And it was like, yeah. So he's the one that sort of opened it up for me.
That's such a powerful story. Yeah, I recently read Langston Hughes in my history class. We were studying the Harlem Renaissance, and I recently read him, and I really, really that also certainly was an eye-opening read for me as well.
I think every school should teach Langston. He's amazing. He's prolific. He's one of the pillars of Black literature. So glad to hear that your school sees the wisdom and the value of having him and other Harlem Renaissance people, hopefully, on their scheduled reading list.
Looking at your website, I saw your letter to a reader explaining how you went from a physician to a writer. And I'm just sort of wondering, what inspired this change?
Oh, that is so funny because I was never a physician, but I love that you thought I might have been. But there's probably a lot of talk about that on the internet because I went to college hoping to become a physician. I just wasn't very good at math or science. Something you probably need to be good at if you're going to be a doctor. And I tell young people, I kept taking courses in accounting, even though I wasn't good at math, and I wanted to be a computer analyst. And for some reason, I kept with these sciences for a little while. And I discovered that I really was very good at writing. I'm not quite sure how I discovered that, other than maybe I was taking English classes at the same time, or I wasn't very good at a lot of other things, right? And I discovered that I loved it. I look back at some of the things that I wrote in class and I think, they let me write that, And it was very much talking about what it was like to be Black. It was very much talking about interracial dating and being a Black man and being a Black woman, and it was powerful and it was raw and it was no holds barred. And I look back and say, wow, I was really, really blessed to have some professors that allowed me to have my voice and to have my say, even though I was really bad at spelling. Right, I wasn't great at grammar and spelling, but they were able to look past that and say, well, wait, we think there's something here. And we're going to allow her to, continue to speak with some guidance in her voice. And sometimes people say, well, how did you end up writing for teens? I said, well, one of the things I did when I was in college was I wrote from a teen perspective. So that really began there. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that, when I was young, I always have suffered with, my confidence wasn't great. I always had a big mouth, so people wasn't always certain about that. And so when you're in middle school and elementary school, especially middle school, you start to look at yourself and like, oh, my teeth are too big, my legs are too skinny, right? And I think I sort of hunkered down during that time period. And so I felt a lot. So because I wrote around bullying, young people also think, well, somebody must have been chasing her home and and bullying her, but they weren't. It wasn't that. It was just all these emotions and all these feelings about what it's like to be young and sort of struggling in the skin that you're in, right? And not just because of color or not even because of race, also because you're just a teen, right? You're just young and you're just struggling with being who you are.
That's so interesting that you, chose to adopt that perspective. I kind of relate to that story because, my dad wants me to become a doctor. But I also am similarly uninterested in science and really into writing and reading. So I completely relate to that story. And it's interesting that you chose to adopt the teen perspective. I'm wondering, did writing sort of help you process sort of your experiences as a teenager? Even those years later, was it kind of helped you organize sort of your feelings and thoughts about, your experiences as a teenager, or was there some other inspiration and impetus behind this?
Nina, I always tell people and I tell teachers, you don't exactly teach my brain when you teach young people about writing, right? Because I don't think I really thought so much about that. I thought a lot about being me, but what I did to process that was really I loved therapy. I love listening to therapists on the radio. And I'm talking about in my 20s at this point, because before then they weren't doing it. So I bought books on how to think differently, how to process stuff. So it wasn't even so much at looking at my teenage years saying, oh, why were you this? Why were you that? Sort of, other than maybe looking at, home, you look at home and where you were at in the family and stuff like that. I'm not sure that I processed it all that much in terms of writing. And that sounds probably odd to you because we always hear that writers are doing that sort of thing. For me, I felt a lot. I have a very sensitive spirit. So even when I'm writing my stuff, I can feel what it feels like to be a teen, right? I don't go back and say, hey, what did I do as a teen when I was 10? Sort of. I sort of know. Now, when I was writing The Skin I'm In, a couple other books, I also had my daughter read my book. She was a teenager. But the truth of the matter is, it was very rare that she had to tell me, oh, that's not how teenagers speak. It was more, that part is boring, or something like that. And so, I don't know if I answered your question fully. I think people ought to keep in mind that writers come to writing in a lot of different ways. And sometimes educators, I love them. I go to schools all the time, might sort of put us in the box and say, all writers do it this way. All writers keep it, a plot, or they know where they're going in the book. And I'm the type of writer, I have no idea where I'm going. right? When I wrote The Skin I'm In, all I know I wanted to do was write about a dark-skinned girl. I gave birth to one. She was 7 at the time, so it's not her story. But she is tall, dark, and thin, like the main character. But other than that, I know nothing. And I start writing. And so that's how I go through my books. And that's how my process is. And it's just easier on my mind and my brain, because if I have to think about it, I start to sort of implode a little bit. And then you have other writers what kind of writer are you? You say you like to write. Do you plan it out?
Yeah.
Do you know where you're going?
I would say I'm definitely a planner. Okay. Yeah, I like to jot down ideas, but sometimes, the inspiration just hits and I just write a, bunch of stuff out. But usually I get very intimidated if I don't have, some notes at least. But yeah, so it's interesting.
I love what you just said. And you know why? Because I tell people, I think writers are scared on both sides of that fence. I just sort of go by the seat of my pants because I'm afraid that if I have to think about it, everything starts to, implode or something. You said something. You're a little bit afraid to sort of jump into the water and just swim with no guidance, right? So we're afraid on both sides of the fence, I think. And I think what I hear from other writers sometimes when they hear me say, hey, I just sort of jump in and start swimming. I've had a couple of professional writers say, oh, well, I don't have time to be lost. And I'm thinking, excuse me, I do this for a living. I don't have time to be lost either. So I don't spend a lot of time being lost, right? It's just the way I write. So, right? So we're both are writing the way we write. And that's the best thing, right? If you're writing, you have to be able to figure out your own style, right? And go with that flow. And if you need to switch up, if you need to change, know that you can do that too.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you make about fear being on both ends, because I think fear is really intrinsic to writing. I know that if I know that I have to, crank out a story or something, that I'm just kind of fearful of the blank page, that menacing, white blank page. So that's really interesting what you say about fear. I also wanted to go back to what you said about, being a very sensitive and feeling person, and that sort of coming into your writing and the way that you portray your characters. So I sort of picked up on a theme in the life I'm in, that everyone sort of faces their own unique struggles. So I was very impressed by how you were able to place even the sort of seemingly meanest individuals in this very vulnerable, tender light, very, very focused on their sensitivities. So Char, a bully on the surface, experiences challenges which drive that meanness, and then even Anthony, the head of the trafficking business, is facing his own trials, his sister's illness, his mother's death. So I'm just sort of wondering, why do you think it's important to acknowledge and describe the humanity of each character?
I think that's something that is really within the young adult children's literature market. But I've always had this sense that, there's something, probably at least human and good about all of us, most of us anyway. And so showing Anthony's vulnerability, right? That also, how did Anthony become who he was? How do you become a trafficker? And one thing I did was when doing my research, I had some ideas already about him. I always tell people when I write, I try to go in a direction you don't think I'm going to go into, right? Because especially when you're doing African-American characters, especially when they live in the city, urban environments, people think, oh, I know her, I know him. You don't have to tell me anything about them. I just know who they are. And I'm always, in a sense, trying to say, okay, you don't know who they are. And so for Anthony, I knew I wanted him to dress differently than what we think somebody who traffics people dress. So when you run into Anthony, right, Shar knows clothes and money, right? She knows clothes. So she's like, this watch costs like $400. His jeans cost $700. She can spot that. But I wanted people to be able to say, oh, wait a minute. Who is he? And I did some research and found that a lot of the traffickers, come from families that had something to do with the business, sort of, right? Could have been prostitution. It had something to do with that business in a way that might have led them there. So I wanted to be able to show that this is a family business. And beyond showing this is a family business for him, sort of one of the worst family businesses you could have, I wanted you to scratch him a little bit and see what's there underneath. Had Anthony not been in trafficking, what might he have done for a living? And we find out, right? When you read it, you find out, well, wait a minute, this guy, what? He was in school? I don't want to give too much away. He was in college, right? So just always trying to show that, when I was young, I'm a little older, so maybe I'm a little bit more jaded, but I still have a sensitive soul. But when I was young, I was very, very empathic. I was very much feeling everything and everybody. So there wasn't anybody I'm in my 20s, even my 30s. There wasn't anybody almost that I didn't feel that they had something good and decent about them. I remember working at Pitt. And I don't know if my coworkers ever saw me, but I would sit on the ground with some of the homeless people and have conversations and make lunch for some of them. And I just remember some guy ended up needing to leave town. And I ran into him one day. And I think I gave him I didn't have a lot of money in the bank. I think I gave him my last $30. Now I had a paycheck coming maybe in a week. But so I spent a lot of my time doing some things like that, feeling for other people almost to the point where it was painful, physically painful for me, which makes for good writing, as a matter of fact, right?
Yeah, I remember seeing on your website that you were a counselor at a foster placement agency for about 8 years. Was that one of those experiences where it was very painful, but, sort of inspired your writing?
Well, again, I'm just going to go back. When my first job out of college, I was a house parent at a facility outside of Pittsburgh where, it's funny, I was 21. There were eight or 10 cottages. I worked in one with teenage girls, and they were, kids were there for different reasons. Some of them had been abused. Some of them maybe abused somebody else. Some of them might have been runaways. Lots of stories for different kids. And, it's funny. I tell people they really, I had two minds on that. You can't work in that facilities like that and have a broken heart all the time because you won't last. It'd be too much. I stayed there a year. I didn't leave because of broken heart or anything. So I just was the best person I could be. I was really good with kids anyway. But I also knew I had to be sort of stern. So you had to walk that fence between, I look like I'm 18, but I'm not 18. And you do have to go to bed. So that was that. And then after that, I went to being a counselor with kids in foster placement. And my job was to visit them. Our company, our agency placed them in homes, foster homes. We visited them every week. I went to court with them. There's a lot of different things we went. I don't think I had a broken heart during that experience. What I did, though, was I liked kids. I liked people. I wanted people to do well and do right by them, and I did the best job I could. And I'm sure there's sometimes I worried and things like that. But I have this quirky brain, and I'm 65, so people think, you don't remember now because you're just 65. Well, when I was 20, I in college, I couldn't remember things that I read. There's a lot that I don't remember, so I don't remember a lot of those experiences. I tell people, and I'm really good at. You might have noticed when you read my novel, that I'm really good at staying right in that space, right in that moment, right? So when I write, because I'm not looking ahead, people feel this energy when they read my books, like this sense of right now and urgency. And so I think because I sort of was this right now mental person, I didn't drag a lot of it with me in terms of those experiences. But I just always tried to be fairly nice to people. Maybe a time or two I got that wrong too, but I tried to be fairly nice to people. And what I think I hold on to not so much are the experiences, as my daughter could tell you. She'll say, "You don't remember that?" But I hold on to the feeling of people and places and things. I feel it, which shows up in my writing.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that when reading the book, that it was very in the now, like I wanted to, it was almost suspenseful in parts. Like I wanted to know what was going to happen, but as well, like I definitely felt the feeling in there as well. It was, Shar really came to life for me, like I could sort of understand and grasp, obviously we were very different characters. I can't relate to the entirety of her experience, but, some
Right.
of the things that she experienced as a teenage girl, I felt too. And I think that says a lot about, the way you were able to compellingly portray her emotions in a way that they really touch other readers at their core.
Thank you. The friendship between her and Malika, the big thing about Malika in the first book and Shar is that they really were Malika was always trying to sort of suck up to Shar and have her be nice to her. But when we meet Malika in this book, we see that Malika has set up boundaries, right? That Malika is a whole nother person than she was in the first book. And then the teacher shows up from the first book. Miss Symes is one of the most iconic teachers in literature. So she shows up. But Shar walks this journey where she has to go from being a bully, from letting no one get in to opening up and breaking. And we learned that she's compassionate. We learned that she's charitable. We learned that she has a gift for taking care of other people. We learned what it's like to be in trauma, right? When you are when you're trafficked, right? There's also that part of work. If you come out of it, you're going to be dealing with trauma. What's on the other side of that? How do you get through that? And from Shar, it's a lot of women. It's some men, right? But the message I also want to be able to say here is that it takes people, it takes family, and it takes community to get to the other side, which is a theme through all of my books, as a matter of fact. That teens don't just get through these things on their own, and neither do adults.
Yeah, that support system really came through to me when I was reading. I loved reading about Shar and Miss Saunders' bond. I thought that was just such a compelling relationship that they had. And also the fact that it changed and evolved, throughout the book. I always find that very compelling, when things don't stay the same, but rather they evolve as the characters themselves grow and change. So I was wondering a little bit about the inspiration behind that relationship. You mentioned having some really great professors who were very open to your writing. Was that sort of a source of inspiration for this amazing teacher?
Was it, Nina? I know you're like, what the hell? Excuse me. You know what? Not really. I just have this fondness for teachers and educators, and part of it probably is that I have a lot of friends that are teachers and educators. So that might come from, right? I had good relations with teachers in high school, and I didn't think about them or draw on them when I was writing the book. But again, that feeling probably just stayed in there. People have been waiting 23 years for The Life I'm In. It's gotten 4-star reviews. It's gotten some other notices in terms of the media saying how much they value and appreciate it. And I'm in the middle of writing, believe it or not, a third book from John's perspective. Unless you read The Skin of Me, you wouldn't know who he is. But so I'm writing a third book, and Shar shows up in that one, and so does Malika. So it's been a good ride.
That's so exciting. I'll definitely pick that up when it comes out. That's so amazing that you're continuing the series even further.
I am. My goodness.
Wow. So I guess in closing, if you could share one message with your young readers, what would it be?
Right now, we live in a tough space on the planet, right? Between global warming and, you know, for us in the States, a lot of police killings and racial issues um, for people who might be transgender, you know, being attacked and losing rights. Um, and just being a teenager and trying to have your voice and believing that this world, not just your community, could be a safe space for you, no matter who you are. You know, whether your hair is as curly as mine or as straight as yours, or your skin is as brown as yours or mine, or white and fair, can the world be a safe space for you? And I just want to say that we're going to get through this and the pandemic, right? I almost left that out, that we're going to get through this. One way to get through some of this is through books, it's through novels, it's through reading about people who look like you and who don't look like you, about people who live in your community and people who live far away from your community. And also by believing that on a certain level, we are all the same. We want the same things, right? We want to be able to have a voice. We want people to think we're fabulous, right? And we want people to treat us with dignity and respect. We'll get through this.
Wow, what an incredible answer. I'm sure that will be very inspiring to many kids, like me and everyone who's sort of been going through these difficult times. It's always important to, have hope. And I think that that reading, like you said, can be a great way to sort of cope and also open new worlds. Well, it was so great speaking with Sharon Flake, author most recently of The Life I'm In. Thank you so very much for being with us here at the Library of Congress's National Book Festival. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival.
I will. Thank you. I've done it before. I've been a part of the festival before, so I'm always excited about that. But I've never been interviewed by a teenager as part of it. And I think that's a great move, National Book Festival people. So thank you, Nina. I really enjoyed it.